The Thief and the Cobbler, an animated fantasy epic by the legendary Richard Williams. It was the magnum opus that never was, a passion project that became a dangerous obsession. But above all else, it is notorious for being arguably the most disastrous production in animation history, spanning over 28 years in the making. But its legacy now is a film that grew so far in ambition and scope that it was never finished and released as intended, with the versions that exist out in the world now resembling either a fraction of his vision, and others that aim to get as close to his wishes as possible. During the lengthy development of the movie, Richard and his team were able to complete over 2,500 advertisements for various corporate clients, with many of them going on to win awards for excellence and technical competency. But somehow, all of those accolades were completely eclipsed by this lone passion project, which became so much bigger than just a film, with Richard later calling it his reason for living. What was it about this film's production that got so out of hand? What is the real personal and financial cost of creativity over marketability? And did Disney rip off this movie by creating Aladdin? Yeah, for most folks, that is probably what comes to mind when they watch Thief and the Cobbler. They say, yeah, you stole from Disney. You stole from Aladdin, didn't you? Well, not entirely. So, let us examine this fantasy epic gone awry in The Thief and the Cobbler, The Price of Perfection. Richard Williams had spent 30 years wanting to see his dream realized. After all that, the guy must have been tired. He probably could have used a good nap on a premium mattress like Helix. Helix makes premium mattresses tailored to your unique needs, shipped right to your doorstep with free shipping in the continental US. With an easy-to-handle packaging system, these mattresses come rolled up in a box that can be handled and unpackaged with ease. We all have different sleeping habits, so buying a mattress online can seem odd without trying them. Well, Helix understands this. They got this sleep quiz that helps you to find the right mattress by answering a few questions. You can take the quiz by yourself, or if you sleep with a partner, and I'm not talking about a cowboy, or maybe I am, you can both take the sleep quiz together to figure out the perfect solution for you both. You've all heard about my various travel escapades before. I've been across the world. I've been to Australia. But let me fill you all on my recent adventure. I went to a wolf sanctuary out in the middle of Colorado nowhere. I rented an RV for the occasion. And of course, it came with like the usual de facto bed. This one actually came out of the ceiling. It was kind of weird. Now, did I miss my Helix? Oh, you bet I did. RVs by default should have an outfitted Helix mattress. That would make my van life that much more sweet. Now, while Helix is not in the RV market yet, they do have an excellent lineup, including the award-winning Luxe and Ultra Premium Elite collections, not to mention the Helix Plus for big and tall sleepers, as well as the Helix Kids mattresses, endorsed by sleep and medical experts. And if you're worried about buying online, hey, Helix offers a 100-day sleep trial, where you can sleep on your mattress for up to 3 months to make sure that you love it. Also included is a 10-year warranty and also flexible financing options too. So you can come back to a mattress that you know you will love without a shadow of a doubt. And because we've been partnered up with Helix for so long, we've been given an exclusive partnership offer. So for first-time buyers, head over to helix.com and make sure to use our promo code HelixPartner27 to get 27% off Elite and Deluxe mattresses plus 2 pillows for free. Folks, if you're in the market for a better mattress, then this is a great time to consider a Helix. This offer lasts until after Labor Day, so don't delay. Once again, Helix is one of the best sponsors we've ever had. They make an excellent mattress. I've been sleeping on one for like the last 4 years. They're a long-standing partner for the channel. Go check them out. Thanks again to Helix for sponsoring this video. And now, back to Richard Williams. Born on March 19th, 1933, in Toronto, Canada, Richard Williams grew up with a love of spectacle and art. As a kid, he loved performing in magic shows and reading the Arabian Nights with his mother. But his love for animation blossomed after Richard saw Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs at age 5. From there, all he could think about was drawing and animating, even getting to meet and train with some Disney animators. By his late teens, he decided cartoons were for babies, and instead got really into Rembrandt paintings. You know, the next logical step. Rishi was profoundly inspired by the level of humanity conveyed in Rembrandt's paintings after seeing a gallery of his work in 1953 at age 20. For 2 years, Richard's artwork was almost exclusively paintings, made with painstaking detail and attention. But he gradually got fed up dealing with the snobs of the art world, with his work being sought after by rich industrialist wives. Yeah, I can see that being annoying too.
Bullshit. Bullshit. Derivative.
Instead, Richard rediscovered his love for animation, wanting to find some way to combine the technical know-how of painting with the timing and humor of animation. From there, he moved to England in 1955 and made his own short films, including The Little Island in 1958, later winning the BAFTA for Best Animated Film. Which, by the way, that is foreshadowing for later because Richard Williams was really good at winning awards. With Little Island's success, he made more shorts into the early 1960s, including Love Me, Love Me, Love Me in 1962. And it was so well received that he started his own small animation studio. Based in London's Soho district, Richard Williams Animation Ltd. Made most of their money making advertisements and credit sequences for films like What's New Pussycats?, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, and the original Casino Royale, a spy comedy film starring Peter Sellers. God, I feel old. But the studio hit a new stride with their work on The Charge of the Light Brigade, a 1968 anti-war satire film by Tony Richardson. Now, it did not do so swell at the box office, but the animated sequences by Williams' crew left a big impression, as they were made to look like 19th century political cartoons. Like, check the sequence out, it is so cool. Their sequence in the film showed the versatility of the artist who could seemingly duplicate nearly any animation style with a heavy emphasis on fluidity. This collection of talent would be put to the test as they began to work on their biggest project ever, one that would gradually tear the studio apart.
It's a remarkable medium. You can do anything. You can change it, you see. And if you're playing a chorus, if you're improvising on an instrument, you have to do it then, that's it. But with this stuff, you can just keep fixing it. You can improvise, you can plan it, you have total flexibility with animation.
To start things off, I'm going to provide a brief synopsis of the film's plot, the way that Richard intended it. By the way, folks, for those who can, take a drink every time I say the word balls. You'll see what I mean. You've been warned.
2 shots of vodka.
Falls the t-shirt, falls the coloring book, falls the lunchbox. Last but not least, falls the doll.
Also, I want to give a big, giant shout out to the filmmaker Kevin Schreck and his documentary, The Persistence of Vision. It was integral to the research for this video, and I highly recommend checking it out for yourself. Okay, here we go. Thousands of years ago in ancient Persia, there was a golden city protected by 3 golden balls, mounted on a palace tower. As stated by a prophecy, if the balls were removed, chaos and doom would destroy the city, but it could be saved by a simple soul. And that simple soul is Treceh, a mute cobbler who gets tangled up by the thief and causes an accident involving Zigzag, the Grand Vizier, played by the horror movie icon and legend Vincent Price.
Great King Nod, have no fear. Zigzag, your Grand Vizier, is here.
But before Treceh can be executed, the king's daughter, named Princess Yum Yum,
Yummers,
intervenes by claiming she needs a cobbler to fix her shoe. In the meantime, the thief escapes and has his sights set on stealing the golden balls. But there's another looming threat from the One-Eyes, a spooky warrior Cyclops monster people who are on their way to destroy the city. The thief successfully manages to remove the balls before they are apprehended by Zigzag's weird gaggle of yes-men. By the way, Zigzag is a double agent, a traitor who's willing to use his bounty as a bargaining chip, either by returning them to the king in exchange for marrying the princess or making a deal with the One-Eyes to use them on their giant war machine. Running out of time, King Nod sends the princess, her nurse, who's like a really badass nun, and Tak out to the desert to locate an ancient witch to find some way to protect the city. Oddly enough, Tak is revealed to be the chosen one and has to use his own tools to stop the army. There's also a gang of brigands, meaning highway robbers, and they join the crew as Princess Yum Yum's bodyguards. I remember watching one of the versions of the movie with these guys singing. It is so weird. They're like, boom, boom, doom, doom, boom, gonna do. Where what happens when you don't go to school? Where what happens when you don't finish school? Sure, the plan is vague, I get it, and it seems insurmountable, but the group returns back home with a war machine looming just outside the city. And when I say war machine, I mean the war machine. Look at that thing. That is a city leveler right there. So Tak goes full-on David versus Goliath, creating a slingshot to fire a tack straight at the machine. As the war machine is dismantled somehow in a truly wild chain reaction, the thief slowly retrieves the balls, somehow managing to avoid being killed at every single turn. Somebody get OSHA on the horn. This war machine is woefully below standards, and it's a whimsical death trap. Zigzag fails to escape and gets eaten by crocodiles. Why not? While Tak fights off the thief to get back the balls. I'm telling you, folks, you're gonna get drunk if you take a shot for every ball I say. Eventually, the thief cuts his losses and just gives them up. He's like, whatever. Look at this emote. He's like, whatever, I'm out. With peace to the kingdom finally restored, Tak marries Princess Yum Yum and breaks his silence with his only line in the entire film. Are you ready? You want to know what his voice sounds like? Here it is.
I love you.
I love you. And folks, that is pretty much it, I guess. That's the movie. And upon rewatching it recently, the core issues with the movie are pretty noticeable. So how do I put this politely while still being respectful to the source material? I think you can tell where they spent the money on this production, and it definitely wasn't the script.
What are you doing?
Nothing. Me? Just hanging around.
As gorgeous as this movie is, I think what really holds it back is the story. Great visuals can't compensate for a plot this messy and convoluted. There's a lack of structure and momentum that makes the film meander more than it really should. Yes, there are pacing issues in this film, big time. We kind of know what's happening, but not why we, as an audience, should care about what's happening. The characters can be entertaining to watch, especially the thief who steals the spotlight every chance he gets. A very apt name, varying character, my dude, so props to that. Vincent Price was an inspired choice to play Zigzag, with his wild gesticulations and flair for the dramatic. Tak is cute in a vintage Tumblr sexy man kind of way. Before we had Sans Undertale and Jax from Digital Circus, we had Tak from The Thief and the Cobbler, and we were thankful for it. But both King Nod and Princess Yum Yum are forgettable. We don't know much about their personalities, with most of their development existing on a surface level. The only character who has a satisfying or at least understandable arc is Zigzag. But the other characters feel very superficial, with more of their bonds being implied than actually being shown on screen. As characters, they're pretty flat. We don't learn all that much about them or see them evolve in a notable way. But I suppose that's not really what the filmmakers were going for anyway. A fantasy epic like this is generally more about the scale and lavish production values, which the studio accomplished and then some. But I wish they had managed to get a more interesting story in there during all that time. It's like they put all of their points in animation and maxed out those skills, but for story, not so much.
Thief. 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 Thief.
You should say something else.
With it all being said, though, let's get into the main reason why we're here. The hellish production behind The Thief and the Cobbler. I've heard about some pretty bad productions in my past. Mars Needs Moms comes to mind. Rock and Rule. But Thief and the Cobbler takes the cake. Let me tell you why. During the start of the project's development, the movie actually went through several titles. At first, it was originally called Nasruddin, and was going to be based on a series of folklore books by Afghani author Idris Shah. In 1964, Williams had provided illustrations for his books about folklore hero Mullah Nasruddin, and had pitched the idea of doing a feature film to Shah. Idris Shah's brother, Omar Ali Shah, was actually a producer working at Richard Williams Productions at the time, and got them in touch with each other. Williams was working on Nasruddin's development in between commercial gigs and a TV special adaptation of A Christmas Carol for American animator Chuck Jones. This spanned from 1964 to 1972, with two other title changes in the process: The Amazing Nasruddin into The Majestic Fool. The Christmas Carol special produced by Chuck Jones was their first large-scale 30-minute short film project. The animators were crunching through 48 hours straight to get the animation done on schedule before the deadline. This practice was not that unusual for the studio, as Williams was notorious for making serious demands of his artist.
He had a terrible reputation, and he could be the best and the worst, but usually for good reason. If he had very high standards, which he applied to himself above all and to everyone else. And if you didn't sort of cut it, then he wasn't backward about letting you know what he felt.
But that attention to detail paid off massively from a critical standpoint. The adaptation was done in the style of the classic Dickensian illustrations for the novel, and it won the studio a 1972 Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film. Even with the Oscar win, Williams saw making the special as a trial run for making the Nasruddin movie, as the short was 1/3 of the runtime they were projecting for a feature film. Composer and story development artist Howard Blake worked for Williams between 1972 and 1975. He encouraged Richard to reevaluate the narrative structure of Nasruddin, as well as changing the title. As it was, the story was more of an anthology following individual tales from the series, and had no overarching plot anchoring them together. Per his recommendation, Richard started developing the story into a more traditional 3-act structure. But this impacted his arrangement with the Shaw brothers, who wanted a 50% split of everything related to Nasruddin, including the title character. And on top of that, at the same time, Omar was suspected of embezzling money from the company and was promptly fired, taking the character designs with him, excluding one in particular. And God, were they lucky, the thief's design, which the Shaw's family ironically let Richard keep for his own project. Talk about lucky, that's a good thing, as it would have sucked to have lost the thief's design. It is brilliant. This dissolution was extremely messy, with hundreds of drawings, layouts, and concepts being scrapped. They pivoted the feature completely, rescripting it and developing new characters, but still retaining the same ancient Persian art aesthetic. This time, it had the novel twist of incorporating more silent comedy. The character of Tak was created as a perfect fool, much like silent comedians of the 1920s like Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin. At this time in 1973, The rough title Richard had come up with was The Cobbler, the Thief, and the Grand Vizier. Yeah, he wasn't that great with coming up with titles. What are you, Pixar? So for those of you keeping track, we're already up to about 5 title changes and almost 10 years of development. Sure, movie titles change for marketability sometimes, but this was rapidly becoming a bad habit, and more importantly, a sign of things to come. This rebranding gave the studio a renewed passion for developing the film, as its scope grew even larger. It evolved into a visual feast for the eyes. But with those growing ambitions came a bigger problem. Yeah, it's a tale as old as time. You guessed it, the impending cost of the production. The timing could not have been worse, as the UK was entering an economic recession, and fewer producers were willing to pony up money for large-scale epics like this one. Instead, to keep the business afloat, the company took on every commercial job they were offered. Disney veteran animator Art Babbitt was hired by Williams to coach and train the animation team to get their work up to standard. It was grueling, but their animation skills improved greatly. Soon, they would be ready to tackle any new job given to them. Richard mostly saw working on the commercials as a job is a job, with the work he was most proud of being the feature production. He saw making ads as selling out, going against his pure artistic tendencies. However, he found a way to deal with working on commercial gigs by incorporating as much of his own style into them as possible, all while staying within the client's demands. If he wanted to see this thing through, he'd have to make sure they could actually afford to get started on it again from the ground up. Animation is expensive, and paying a team adds up quickly. Money was Richard's biggest nemesis throughout his whole saga, except of course for his own high standards. In the mid-1970s, Richard Williams Productions provided the opening animation for The Return of the Pink Panther, and also The Pink Panther Strikes Again. From there, the quality of their ads were truly spectacular, and they started winning tons of awards to prove it, earning over 175 by the early 1980s. I honestly could not even imagine most companies nowadays being willing to pay for this level of detail and experimental technique in 2D animation. Folks, do yourself a solid and check out this playlist that catalogs their advertising work. It is genuinely amazing to look at. But despite all of the accolades, Richard's true passion eluded him, as the amount of time and money he'd need to spend on getting his dream film finished had no clear end on the horizon. And with a character as complicated to draw as Zigzag, well, the animators had their work cut out for them. Ironically, the flexibility of animation was a double-edged sword for The Thief and the Cobbler's production. The amount of creative control and freedom it gave Richard as a director exasperated his perfectionist tendencies. Because they weren't being held down by a corporate studio mandate or fixed to a deadline to stay mindful about cuts or changes, entire sequences of character animation and technical set pieces would be scrapped, and then completely redrawn or changed if it wasn't aligning with what Richard wanted to accomplish with the film.
There's one sequence where the vizier was throwing cards up in the air, and each card was individually painted. All the hearts and diamonds and spades, and it took one of the painters about 3 months to paint one scene, and then Dick didn't like it and changed the colours, so it was all done again. He must have spent thousands and thousands and thousands on stuff that was never used.
Good Lord, what a thankless task. Now, it's important to mention that at the time, many animated productions and TV shows were operating under increasingly limited budgets. The 1970s was an era of stagflation, war, and crappy politics. I guess some things never change. But this era would give us more economical productions like Hanna-Barbera's Saturday morning cartoons, such as Scooby-Doo and Josie and the Pussycats. They dominated the TV landscape by using more limited animation to save money. Feature animation productions being offered by companies like Disney and Warner Brothers also put in cost-cutting measures, most of them being pretty tough to ignore. There are chances you've seen footage of the recycled animation that was used in films like The Jungle Book and Robin Hood, taken from their previous films like Snow White and Winnie the Pooh. Meanwhile, at Warner Brothers, David Zaslav was there. Now, the only animated features they were putting out at the time were called package films, like the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner movie, which, are just old Looney Tunes animated shorts being repurposed with a very limited amount of new animation as a narrative bridge. So for contrast, Richard's obvious passion and cult of personality kept veteran animators like Ken Harris and Art Babbitt working on the movie. Williams cherished animation as an art form and wanted to do whatever he could to preserve the craft and allow it to shine. Even though the work was extremely technically demanding, the studio animators rose to the challenge because they saw it as part of the greater good. Namely, providing the highest quality animation they could muster on an ambitious project that demanded it. But his tunnel vision did not make the crew of animators better workers. Or rather, it made them afraid to piss him off by putting out subpar work and risk getting fired. Work-life balance was basically non-existent at the studio, with animators having far too much work on their plates, toggling between finishing commercials with strict deadlines and their feature film, which could not stick to a consistent title or even a script long-term during production. In many ways, Richard knew that the scope of The Thief and the Cobbler would eclipse anything that was being done in animation at that time. It rapidly became his own personal Star Wars, a fantasy epic that would be a huge crowd pleaser and become the biggest blockbuster film in animated film history. Or, so he had hoped. Between 1975 and 1977, the studio had provided animation work for Raggedy Ann and Andy, A Musical Adventure, a hybrid live-action animated film featuring the classic children's toy characters of the same name. The history behind that movie is a bizarre story unto itself. So if you folks want me to do a deep dive history about that topic, hey, let me know down in the comments and maybe we'll follow up. Also, this scene with the greedy, that's insane. Like with the candy monster, look at that. That blows my mind. Richard Williams and his team are crazy. But they had a breakthrough in 1978. The studio was contracted by a new outside investor named Mohammed bin Faisal Al Saud. Now, if that sounds like a prince's name, well, that's because it is. A literal Saudi Arabian prince at that, who provided the crew with $100,000 to fund a 10-minute test sequence as a proof of concept. For reference, that amounts to a little over $475,000 in today's currency. God, inflation's a bitch. Eager to impress the prince and hopefully entice him to fund the studio further, Williams chose an ambitious third-act sequence involving the thief chasing after the golden balls, with One Eye's war machine being completely destroyed around him. To this day, it is one of the most spell-binding sequences of animation I've ever seen. The comedic timing is immaculate. It is intricately drawn to the finest detail, and still manages to cram in some amazing character work of the thief, oblivious to everything surrounding him. It is some of the greatest physical comedy in animation history. Rube Goldberg would be so proud. As a tech demo, it is absolutely phenomenal and showcases the extreme talents of Richard Williams Productions. However, as a proof of concept from a business perspective, I could see the first questions coming from a producer being, what's your timeline on finishing this thing? What's the plot overview? How long did it take to make this sequence? And most importantly, how much did this cost? All of the answers to these questions have been issues plaguing the production from day one. And once again, Richard's worst tendencies came screeching out. The studio missed 2 deadlines, taking a full year to create the 10-minute sequence. And what was supposed to cost $100,000 back then ended up running over $250,000. No matter how good the animation was, Al Saud saw this as a sign of things to come and backed out of the project. And yeah, I can't really blame him. While this set up a positive impression for the quality of their work, it reflected poorly on their time management and fiscal responsibility. Budget restraints and a reasonable timeline are two incredibly important factors for any producer willing to invest in a feature film. They need to know when it's going to be finished and how financially viable it will be for them to invest so much, and how to turn a sizable profit later. By Richard's estimation in the early 1980s, funding the creation of the entire movie to his vision would have cost about 10 million British pounds or 20 million US dollars. For reference, 20 million buckaroos in American in 1982 would equate to about $64 million today. That kind of budget for an animated film back then was unheard of. Like, goddamn, that's still a pretty sizable budget today. That's how much most Illumination movies cost. Oh, that's how this film could have been saved. Thief and the Cobbler crossover with the Minions. Boom, we're in business. The lengthy development period was starting to take its toll against the crew. Not only were they getting fed up and quitting after being denied time off for such mundane things like the birth of their first child, but Ken Harris, who had been working on the movie for 14 years, passed away from Parkinson's disease in 1982. He was 83 years old. Sounds like a quitter to me, right? I'm sorry, that's not funny. The studio needed a miracle to get through the 1980s. Luckily, they would get one in the form of a Hollywood A-list director. You might have heard of him, Steven Spielberg. He had seen one of the commercials and part of the battle sequence test animation, thinking they would be just the studio to pitch a movie development concept to. Spielberg asked them to create a test animation involving a hard-boiled detective and a cartoon rabbit exploring a seedy back alley, complete with dynamic lighting and realistic interactions between the human and the animated characters. With that, Richard Williams Productions was brought on to animate a new hybrid 2D live-action film titled Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Directed by Robert Zemeckis under Disney's Touchstone Productions umbrella, Roger Rabbit was a highly ambitious idea with a brilliant team working on it. And in case you have not seen it before, which, oh my god, what are you doing? Turn this video off right now and go watch it. Yeah, the movie really is just that good. One of the best of all time. The story takes place in 1947 Hollywood, and it follows a cartoon rabbit who is falsely accused of murdering an animation studio CEO. God, I wish it was David Zaslav in Minecraft. It's up to Eddie Valiant, an alcoholic private detective who hates cartoon characters, to clear his name and bring the real criminal to justice. Originally based on the 1981 book Who Censored Roger Rabbit by Gary K. Wolfe, this project seemed tailor-made for someone as detail-oriented as Richard Williams. It had a heavy emphasis on high-quality fluid animation based on characters from the 1940s, believable compositing of 2D characters interacting with real-life actors and props, as well as highly expressive animation from the wacky lead rabbit himself, Roger. At first, Williams was originally hesitant to take on the job, hating most attempts at combining live action and animation, seeing it as something that will never really work out. But Disney and Spielberg pledged to help him make his dream of releasing The Thief and the Cobbler a reality, by promising to help finance the film and get a distributor for it. With that, Williams took the deal and was about to make animation history. The film's budget was originally greenlit at $30 million. If they could pull off all this technical wizardry required to make it look seamless, Roger Rabbit was bound to be a huge movie. Disney had to license out characters from other studios of the era to use them in the film, down to setting an equal amount of screen time for character cameos, like with Donald Duck versus Daffy. You can't have one overshadowing the other. And in a twist that should not surprise any of you at this point, the budget started to climb along with delays for getting the animation done properly, even with 326 animators available on the payroll. When all was said and done, the movie cost in total around $60 million to make. But my god, it was worth it. Who Framed Roger Rabbit is an absolute triumph in every sense of the term, and deserved all the success it earned, including its worldwide box office gross of $351 million. Through all of this spectacle, Richard Williams and his team were lauded for their sensational work on the movie, with Williams receiving not one, but 2 Oscars. A Best Special Effects Award he shared with other members of the crew, and his own Special Achievement Award for Animation Direction. It was the type of accolade any serious filmmaker could hope for. But it seemed for Richard, well, he thought he was being praised for the wrong movie.
Thank you. Thanks. The best is yet to come.
Obviously, he was deeply proud of the work they achieved on Roger Rabbit. But he wanted to use that newfound fame and interest into getting The Thief and the Cobbler finished. After all, with Roger's success, Richard Williams was not just an underground animator anymore. He became a household name. Now, surely getting the financing he needed to finish his magnum opus would be a slam dunk from here on out, right? Yeah. Let's just say it's complicated. Very complicated. Despite the promises of both Disney and Spielberg, they both fell through, with Disney instead going all in on their own animation studio productions with their upcoming release of The Little Mermaid. Meanwhile, Steven Spielberg opted to create his own animation studio, Amblimation, and made a number of films with an American animator named Don Bluth. After Roger's award sweep, well, Warner Brothers... That was weird. Anyway, Warner Brothers offered Richard a production deal in the form of a negative pickup. This basically means that Warner Brothers would be purchasing the domestic and/or international rights to the film from the studio in exchange for funding and marketing it. Upon its release, they would split the profits between the studio and the distributor. So with this deal, Warner Brothers would give him approximately $25 million to finish the film, along with a $25 million marketing budget. Agreeing to these stipulations, he wanted 3 years to finish it, and hit the ground running in 1989. With many of his former artists having since retired, or moved to different studios, or died since the late 1970s, Williams hired tons of recent college grads from around the world, many of whom had not yet developed their own style, so he could hone their talents on the film. But this was not to say Warner Brothers just gave him a blank check and hoped for the best. For Williams, his reputation had preceded him. For them to put up this much money to finish an already 20-year-old film was a dicey situation, to say the least. To deal with this, Warner Brothers signed an agreement with the Completion Bond Company, more or less a line of insurance to guarantee they would be getting a completed movie. Otherwise, the film would be finished independently of Williams, under Warner Brothers' guidance instead. Even with all these conditions, Williams still could not stop his own feature creep tendencies. If a shorter shot turned out particularly well, he wanted to extend its duration out further, 2, 3, sometimes even 4 times longer than it was originally created. Aesthetically, it was still a remarkable piece of work, but they had a very real ticking clock to worry about now. This was an adult-oriented animated film that was light on the dialogue, but heavy on the atmosphere. So, to hear that Disney was, coincidentally, working on something that was the complete opposite of The Thief and the Cobbler, meaning a family-friendly musical with rapid-fire jokes and a light, approachable love story, but just so happened to be set in an Arabian setting? Yeah, alarm bells were going off. Disney's Aladdin was set to premiere before The Thief and the Cobbler, and most certainly was going to steal their thunder. Now, granted, Thief was in development for decades, and quite a few of the animators who used to work for Williams went on to get jobs at rival studios, including Andreas Deja and Eric Goldberg, 2 supervising animators for Jafar and the Genie respectively. Also, both Thief and Aladdin were influenced by the 1940 British fantasy film The Thief of Baghdad. Williams appreciated it more for stylistic inspiration, whereas Disney just straight up lifted characters and names directly from it. But at the very least, It does feel like bad form on Disney's part to make their own great value version of The Thief and the Cobbler, considering how well Roger Rabbit did financially for the company. I say great value. Aladdin's amazing, but yeah, I could imagine emotions were feeling pretty tense for Richard Williams and team. But Richard's next move would have to be a strategic one. To ensure they'd meet the deadlines, the animators had to work a grueling 60-hour work week, by either working 4 hours late each day during the week or working a full 10-hour shift on both Saturday and Sunday. How they did not tar and feather him for demanding that, I have no idea. But they still weren't any closer to finishing on schedule. Morale was at an all-time low, with exhausted workers being fired left and right. And somehow, in the midst of all this chaos, Richard Williams had never actually finished the complete storyboards for the entire overarching plot of the film. Let that sink in. All right, give it a moment. All right, hear me out. During the 25 years working on this project, he never actually finished making the complete storyboards, with the smaller character scenes basically coming up as an afterthought. How's that possible? What was he thinking? What was he doing? Like, I know he's busy, but like, it's 25 years. 25 years. That's a lot of time. For those who don't know, storyboards are generally the first or second major step in creating a production pipeline for an animated project. Usually, they're being made concurrently with the script. And get this, many live-action films use them too, since they're critical for staging a shot or factoring in camera angles and are used as reference material during production to make sure everyone's on the same page. Ideally, it's supposed to function like a giant comic strip, to show the overarching plot, to save time by illustrating key moments before they're animated, and refine the story while looking for any gaps, plot holes, or issues with the film as a whole. You know, those constant recurring issues the movie has been plagued with for most of its existence. Look, I don't mean to sound reductive here, but I'm guessing those smaller scenes did not quite interest Richard enough to want to work on them. So he ignored them until it became an issue. He had lofty ideas for getting the major set pieces out. Sure, that's great and all, but there's a reason the transitions feel arbitrary and tacked on. Because guess what? They totally are. Those transition scenes were pretty much the only parts that were receiving a storyboard treatment, while the animators were crunching through the entire process to the point of exhaustion. And of course, they missed their 1991 deadline from Warner Brothers to finish the film. Still shy of 10 to 15 minutes of finished animation, the completion bond company finally came in to see what the holdup was. Warner Brothers demanded to see a rough cut of the work print animation up to this point. He cobbled together everything he had to make the narrative make sense, ranging from finished animation to pencil test to even storyboards set to music.
And I believe that quite a lot of the film, there was far too much and of this incredible quality, but then there were huge gaps in other areas. And indeed, if you haven't really done the storyboard, you haven't really worked it out, even if he had it in his mind. Other people wouldn't have known.
The screening was held on May 13th, 1992, and it went about as bad as you could imagine. Technically, they had enough footage to fulfill an 85-minute runtime, but critical parts of the story were still missing and would take even more time to finish animating. Afterwards, the animators were heavily advised to take their 2 weeks of paid vacation time immediately, because if you don't use it, you lose it. Warner Brothers had finally had enough. Richard and his team were kicked off of working on the film on May 15th, 1992. With the completion bond company raiding the studio of any leftover raw footage. They were replaced by Fred Calvert, a TV animation producer brought in to fix any gaps in the movie with quick and cheap animation, along with songs to pad out the runtime. I wonder where they got that idea from. 2 of those songs, She Is More and Am I Feeling Love, were shopped out to Sullivan Bluth Productions in Ireland and Croyer Films in LA, respectively. Calvert was well aware of how weird the situation was with the movie. but did genuinely seem to want to salvage what he could. So The Thief and the Cobbler wouldn't just be lost to time. Overall, they had to cut 18 minutes of finished footage to make the plot make sense. And it clearly did not align with Williams' vision at that point, with voice actors dubbing over both of the mute characters, Tack and the Thief respectively. But he had a year and 6 months to get it ready for theaters. As quoted in an LA Times article around the film's US release, Calvert was quoted saying, quote, "I really did not want to do it, but if I didn't do it, it would have been given off to the lowest bidder. I took it as a way to try and preserve something, and at least get the thing on the screen and let it be seen. Whatever is wrong with the film, I'm sure someone will blame me for it." End quote. Harsh, but yeah, he's not wrong. What's weird is that even with these new changes and cuts being made, there were 2 versions of the film released for different markets. Calvert's original edit was released as The Princess and the Cobbler for distribution in South Africa and Australia on September 23, 1993. It was also further released as The Thief and the Cobbler in the Philippines on April 23, 1994. In the US, things got worse. The film was cut even further. The voice actors were recast with celebrities like Matthew Broderick and Jonathan Winters, and it was eventually released in theaters as Arabian Night on August 25, 1995, distributed by Miramax. But even with these changes, the movie was a complete failure, only making around $320,000 in the United States against a projected $24 million budget. That is devastating.
I watched it at home on a video. Yeah, I almost burst into tears when I saw that. Yeah, I was heartbroken because it was just a mess.
Things seemed at their most dire when copies of the movie were given away as prizes in a box of Fruit Loops. Oh my God, that's talk about salt in the wound, right? The entire team gradually moved on from the project, with Richard not wanting to discuss the failure of The Thief and the Cobbler publicly for ages. Notoriously, Williams would kick out people from his Q&A panels who tried to bring it up, but he eventually made his peace with it as a project that got too big for its britches. Money issues and scheduling delays were constant problems during the film's development. But the issue that topped them all also made those problems worse: Richard's unwavering perfectionism, where every frame had to be drawn and composed to his exact specifications, which kept changing at the drop of a hat. Richard seemed to have a very strong ability to compartmentalize between commercial jobs and working on The Thief and the Cobbler. As a studio, Richard Williams Productions made over 2,500 animated advertisements during their heyday. They received hundreds of awards for the quality of their work. But Richard himself had no passion for making them. He tried to find some kind of fun in it, adding its own flourishes and comedic timing to make them more entertaining. But even that would lead them towards going over budget, with an ad sometimes costing the studio more money to make than what they were actually being paid to make it. Now, to his credit, Richard insisted the team make cuts to the quality of an ad if the client was trying to rush out something faster than their usual development time. As much as he hated doing commercial work, he knew it kept the lights on and kept the staff taken care of. Now, this clearly was not the most sustainable business model, but it worked for them. Well, at least for a while. To me, Williams' biggest fault is by far his relentless perfectionism that made the process of finishing the film that much more difficult. Because it was mostly self-financed, he was less beholden to upper management demands or abiding by their deadlines. On the surface, this looks like creative freedom, but in actuality, it's a distinct lack of structure which really bogs down the movie. The film had an abundance of creativity to bring Richard's vision to life, but the cost of doing an independent animated film of this scope without a major studio backing it led the production into severe delays. For contrast, most animated movies and TV shows are animated at 12 frames per second on twos, meaning 2 shots of the same drawing equaling 12 frames per second. This lends itself to be a more cost-effective method of animation, as more frames equals more money. However, The Thief and the Cobbler was animated on 24 frames per second, meaning each frame was its own unique drawing. Richard was a stickler when it came to every aspect of the movie, but especially with timing. He would have his artists redo entire segments if the timing wasn't up to snuff. This was done to ensure the movement and timing was the most fluid it could possibly be, especially for a film scale. But this led to shots taking twice as long as they usually would. Hundreds of frames would be scrapped, or sequences would be fully cut if they did not match his vision. The amount of redrawn frames would add up quickly, draining both their resources and their time. So the crew was always in the red, trying to keep up with the demands of the film's quality. He was also notorious for firing artists that could not keep up with his standards, going through hundreds of animators towards getting it completed. However, I find it particularly crazy that the movie he's best known for now, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, completely overshadows his beloved passion project. Whether he would admit to it or not, I truly do think that Richard did his best work with a moderate level of structure and restriction. When he was paired up with a kindred spirit like Robert Zemeckis, a director who is also notorious for his love of feature creep using film technology, they both brought out the best in each other creatively. Robert and Richard both love to push their chosen mediums to an extreme. The production for Roger was thankfully anchored to a company that A, had an amazing script, B, was willing to take the risk backing it up by keeping the animation and special effects units in check, and C, had the available capital to make it a reality. And the rest of the crew who worked with him saw this too, as detailed in the Persistent of Vision documentary.
I have the feeling that on Roger Rabbit, because it wasn't his baby, it wasn't his project, it was probably a lot easier with pressure from a producer to say, all right, this will just have to do. And you do that in any film and in any commercial, you have to. And he's done it in commercials before. I think somebody basically walking up to him and saying, can't you just do this simpler so we get it finished? That just wasn't a possibility. There was no simpler. It was just that it was either Dick's way or no way.
So overall, as a production, The Thief and the Cobbler is undeniably a work of art. The intense amount of detail and animation fluidity still makes it a joy to watch. As advanced as newer animation techniques have gotten these days, there's still something really wondrous and awe-inspiring, seeing how far they push the medium of traditional animation. But as far as a film goes, I still find it pretty lacking. It's clearly obvious just how secondary the story and the characters are to the visuals in this movie. They spent so much time and energy making the animation gorgeous and fluid that they forgot to make the story interesting or fleshed out the characters to make them feel like real people rather than props. The plot itself is pretty basic and honestly kind of boring independently of the visually striking action sequences. There's a lack of organic flow between the sequences, as the transitions between scenes usually just fade to black. It just doesn't have the right sense of balance to give us enough character work between them to make it feel more engaging. So when it comes to pacing, yeah, there's problems. But don't get me wrong, there are some incredible standalone sequences. Like, it is mesmerizing and fun as hell to watch Tak chase the thief, or the sequence with the war machine getting destroyed. It gives us some tremendous physical comedy, with a good dash of how the hell did they even do that moments that are still hilarious by today's standards. But the scenes outside of that really do a number on the pacing. As a narrative, everything can't be propped up by giant set pieces alone. Nobody really cares about Tak and Yum Yum's relationship, because we already know they're going to hook up by the end of it. There's no mystery or stakes there. It's just another thing to check off the list of story beats. So if a number of potential investors or studio producers saw how much money the company was burning through, with detailed but short sequences of animation to show for it, and they ultimately decided to not work with them, yeah, I totally get it. One way or another, the studio needed to deliver a finished film and could not do it within the parameters set up by their financial backers. It's heartbreaking because there's so much talent on display here, but that does not always translate to marketability. The Thief and the Cobbler is a massive achievement and a spectacle of visual entertainment, but it's so niche that it was realistically never going to make a substantial commercial return on investment. But hey, that's a passion project for you. Frankly, I don't think that widespread commercial success was ever Richard's plan from the start. It was a film by animators for animators. That is about as specific as you can get. And most audiences won't appreciate that level of detail if the story is mid. This entire film was plagued with issues of balancing style over substance, with style clearly overshadowing everything else. Now, folks, I am a big fan of fantasy epics, but my personal favorites like Dune, which I know is a sci-fi fantasy, and Lord of the Rings do one thing this movie does not. They both spend substantially more time focusing on character development and why their arcs matter to the plot. To me, there is a big difference between simple storytelling and a story being noticeably underwritten. Richard claims his biggest regret with the film seems to be teaming up with a major American studio in the first place, as he explained during a 2014 Q&A at the British Film Institute.
And in hindsight, we should have just gone to Europe. Slowly, take another 5 years, made it on our own. And then go to a distributor and you get it, people would find it as a novelty.
This movie was created and marketed as an animated feature specifically for an adult audience, with two mostly silent protagonists, lavish environments, and a heavy emphasis on expressive visual comedy. It's not going to be for everybody, but those who get it really get it, and deeply appreciate The Thief and the Cobbler for what it is. That is why the recobbled cut exists. Now, I'm glad some dedicated folks have seen the studio's level of craftsmanship as a piece of visual history that should be preserved, archived, and appreciated. That takes a lot of time and energy, and I'm glad someone cared enough about this film to do that. But I also think it's important to learn from the mistakes of The Thief and the Cobbler while reflecting on it. At the risk of sounding preachy, here's a piece of advice for folks watching who might be struggling with their own perfectionist tendencies, myself included. I am perfect after all. True perfection does not exist. It just does not. Perfection is a goal you can chase, but you can never catch it. All of these creative choices boil down to a need for control and a fear of bad presentation. But perfection is subjective, and it really boils down to a specific person's taste. There's no absolute guide for stuff like that. While you should, of course, aspire to do your best on a creative project, working yourself to the bone to accomplish it is one of the fastest ways to drive yourself nuts. To feel endlessly insecure and also potentially make your colleagues hate you. Maybe all three at once if you don't keep yourself in check. Sometimes good enough is good enough. And perfection is the enemy of the perfectly adequate. Set realistic expectations for yourself, and also others. Use deadlines to get things done on time. Track finances to stay on budget. And be open to reflecting on a project's trajectory if something is not working. Being able to pivot is a skill too. Otherwise, you can get stuck in the sunk cost fallacy, where you constantly keep working on something that gives you no returns because you've already invested so much time, energy, and money into it, even if it's not working out. I've been there. The Land Before Time video, Caleb and Sophia, I've been there for years. Most creatives have, and it's a hard pill to swallow. But setting restrictions for yourself helps make your creative work more manageable. Perfectionism and procrastination are two sides of the same coin. So know your strengths and be honest about your weaknesses to find the right balance between them. Richard Williams was already a phenomenally talented artist. I mean, he wrote the Animator Survival Kit, which is considered the classic how-to guide for learning the fundamentals of animation principles. I own the book. It's amazing. It's honestly one of the staples of animation. Even today, it's a required textbook for many college students pursuing an animation degree. Now, I do think he gradually learned some valuable lessons from this whole ordeal, but it seemed like he had to learn them the hard way. Completing this film was so far out of reach that it ended up consuming him entirely. Eventually, It didn't even seem like Richard was having fun making it anymore. After nearly 3 decades in, it evolved from being a passion project into an emotionally charged financial obligation. In the end, The Thief and the Cobbler remained a project Richard Williams had been working on tirelessly, but was still far from being completed upon his death on August 16, 2019. An unfinished film that became the stuff of legends. The magnum opus that never was. One visionary artist's creative dream that turned into a mirage, and now is lost the sands of time. Hey folks, thanks again for making it to the end of the video. For this week's Indie Spotlight, I would like to recommend Punch Punch Forever. At the time of recording this video, the second episode of the series came out, and it's quite possibly one of the funniest animated series I've ever seen on YouTube. It was created by Spideru. I like saying that. And the series is about this 11-year-old girl named Gogo, her mother, Mama, and her older half-demon sister, Nono. There's also a cool-ass pet frog. Gogo finds herself battling it out with demons and monsters in a tournament-like setting. This series is an absolute love letter to Japan and anime. Hell, the whole thing is recorded in Japanese, and very convincingly so. I see you, Emperor of Japan, in episode 1. You're amazing. I also like the vintage vibe of it. Takes me back to the 1990s, a better time. The visuals are sharp, the characters fun, and the jokes come at you one after the other. Overall, an excellent series that I hope to see more of. I'm genuinely shocked at how good Punch Punch is. It feels dirty that we get to watch it for free on YouTube. So, support it if you can. Once again, folks, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you all next time.